I've lived in Phoenix for about 32 years, but like everybody who's been to television, I've lived in like 8 states.
Yeah.
But I'm a scuba diver, as is my partner, and he and I came down here and we're diving, and we were sitting on a porch drinking rum one night and went, we're going to move here. And we did. So we're in
Yeah.
St. Croix in the U.S. Virgin Islands, which is the quiet island. It's the peaceful island. It's not the dance party island.
That island life.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to start from the very beginning. What was your childhood like? Where are you from originally?
I grew up in northern New Jersey, so I could walk to the end of my street, get on a bus, and be in Manhattan in 40 minutes. I thought all children grew up with New York City type places. Got to go to the theater a lot, go to museums. I mean, it was spectacular as a kid. And then when I went to college at Miami of Ohio, the kids said, "Oh, let's go to the city." I said, "Okay," and they took me to Cincinnati, and I went, "No." This isn't what I had in mind. It really is. Don't mean to diss Cincinnati, but yeah, it was very nice growing up in New Jersey. I find myself defending it quite frequently. People act like it's all concrete, but it's not. I learned to ski there. We had the shore, the Jersey Shore, Broadway, as I said, all sorts of great things growing up. So I was very fortunate growing up in New Jersey.
So when it comes to sports, were you always a fan of sports, even from a kid? Like, how did your passion from sports grow?
Well, let's look at the fact I was before Title IX. I mean, I'm 70. So I was in high school in the early 70s, graduated in 1973. While we had sports in my town, I didn't play team sports. I was an ice skater. And I was not very good. I became an ice dancer. You've probably seen that in the Olympics. But I'm way too big. I mean, I'm like 5'7", and I was probably 145 pounds. And you have to be a tiny little person to do that because you wouldn't want to lift me over your head, right? So I wasn't that great. I really wasn't. But I skated a lot. And I was a very good swimmer. I should have been a swimmer. But back then I was embarrassed to have anyone see me in my bathing suit. How sad, because that's what I was best at. But I got that feeling when I was young and had no idea how ridiculous my idea was that I would be an Olympic gold medalist, right? Just like every kid who picks up a football or a baseball. For a brief period, you think you have a shot. That athletic drive. And so I had that. And then when I was in high school, we had what was called the broadcast crew. And it was a first period of the day, half hour, we had music, we did announcements, that kind of thing. And I was on the broadcast crew. And I was also the statistician for the hockey team. Hockey was huge in northern New Jersey. All the players, we were all in the same arena. I was a figure skater or a dancer, and they were hockey players. That was the sport I loved the most, ice hockey. Today, I'd be a hockey player, okay? But they didn't allow that back then. So one day, one of the hockey players handed me an announcement, and he said, "Would you read this morning on the news?" And I said, "Sure." So I went in, and there was this basket of announcements we all attacked every morning, and I grabbed all the sports announcements. And 5 minutes before we go on the air, the guys all started screaming, and there were only like 2 girls on the broadcast crew. It was all guys mostly, and they started yelling that you can't do the sports. You're a girl, and so we're all fighting with each other, and the teacher who was the head of it said, "If Annie wants to read the sports, she can read the sports. She got a show to do the show." I enjoyed that, right? So the next day, I grabbed all the sports announcements again, and now the guys are really mad at me. And they started playing Mission Impossible, the theme to Mission Impossible, dun, 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 because I think they were trying to embarrass me somehow. And then they started calling me Big Ann. Up next, Big Ann with the sports. And I really liked it, but they were trying to humiliate me a little bit. And so I became the sportscaster. And it's under my high school picture that says, "Here's your local sportscaster." Now, that was 1972 when that started. There weren't women sportscasters. So when my mother came up to me in my senior year in college, going into it, she said, "So what do you want to be when you grow up?"
Right.
I said, "I'm going to be a sportscaster." And there was this pause. And she said, "Don't be ridiculous. I'm trying to have a serious conversation with you." And I said, "But I am serious. I love sports." And I had that brief, I'm going to have a gold medal in the Olympics moment. And I like to, I was in theater. I was in a lot of theater, so I was on stage a lot. And I went, look, I got an audience. I can talk about sports. It's perfect. But there simply weren't women doing that then. Phyllis George, the Miss America one, she did it, but they didn't ask her to talk about why a team was losing or why losing a specific player was so important. She interviewed coaches' wives in her fur coat, that kind of thing. So I'm not dissing her. That's what they allowed her to do then. But other than that, the only women who did sports were like Peggy Fleming did the Olympics. But Peggy Fleming wasn't going to talk about football or baseball or ice hockey.
Right.
So there just weren't any women. And when I went to college, they told me the same thing. You're never going to be a sports reporter because you're a woman. And then my senior year, which was 1977, in college, they said, would you like to co-host a sports show? I said, I'd be delighted. And I co-hosted with a guy, and I went, this is great. And then the football coach, the baseball coach, and the basketball coach all refused to be interviewed by me. They said, absolutely not. We're not going to have a woman interview us. And so I'm like, what am I supposed to do now? I'm anchoring a show, and I have no stories. I have nothing. So I had an epiphany. I went, oh, my goodness. There's the hockey team, the gymnastics team, the tennis team, the swim team, all the archery, all these teams that no one ever paid any attention to. So I started approaching them and said, I'd like to do a piece on you for the TV show. And they were thrilled. They didn't care that I was a woman because no one was paying any attention to them.
So
I got to
smart.
do that. It was a taped show. I got out of college and couldn't get an interview anywhere at all. That was, 1977. And I moved to Washington, D.C., and I had an aunt there, a crazy aunt who was more like a sister. And I couldn't get a job. I mean, I was stupid. It was a huge market. Why would I think anyone would hire me in Washington, D.C.? So I ended up working in a bar in Georgetown in the 80s. And wasn't that fun? Yes, it was. I remember I wanted a job in TV, but I worked in the restaurant a couple of years, and I wasn't going anywhere. Here I am. I'm like 24, and I've got nobody I can't even fill out a form to be in sports. So
is it because you were a female?
Of course, of course, they thought I was crazy. And you know how little weird things happen that you didn't plan.
Yes.
And one night I went to a Washington Capitals game with my aunt, and she had a friend with her, a date, and he was an amateur ice hockey official for kids, little kids, and high school and whatever they played. And he was bemoaning the fact that there weren't enough officials. Just like today, there aren't enough sports officials because it's a tough job. And so my aunt goes, Annie can skate. Why don't you become a referee? And I went, oh, yeah, sure, fine, I'll be a referee. I didn't think much about it, but I filled out the form, and I took the class, and I took the test. And one morning, I was at the restaurant till like 3 a.m, and they scheduled me for like a 6 a.m. hockey game. I've never had hockey skates on in my life. Do you know the difference, by the way, between hockey skates and figure skates?
No, tell me.
Figure skates have toe picks on the edge. On the ends, on the points. And that's so you can land jumps. And that for lazy, bad skaters like me, it was if you fall, you dig your toe pick into the ice and get up, right? Hockey skates don't have toe picks. I didn't know that. I didn't know. And I'm out there 3 hours after I closed the restaurant and with 6-year-olds. You've seen little tiny hockey players, right?
Yeah.
Their little jerseys are down at their ankles. Their little sawdust sticks. Their helmets are too big, right? And I went out to take that first face-off, and I fell. And I couldn't get up. And I got 6-year-olds staring down at me on the ice. I fell 3 times trying to get up. And I don't remember. I then got up. I refereed the game. And I don't remember anything else except the ride home. And on the ride home, I realized I didn't know enough to be a sports reporter. I never played basketball. I never played baseball or football or hockey. So how could I be a good sports reporter? So I decided on that ride home that I would become a certified official in the 5 main team spectator sports: football, baseball, ice hockey, soccer, and basketball. And I would do that for 5 years. And that somewhere in the country, there would be a forward-thinking news director who would go, wow, cool, she must know sports. And they would give me a job. And that is exactly what happened. But I had to study rule books and take national exams and become certified year after year. So I will admit to you that football and baseball are the ones that I I did the best at, that I really enjoyed, that I did forever. Ice hockey I did for 5 years, but I moved away from ice. I went out to Phoenix. There wasn't ice there then.
Yeah.
And I sucked at basketball and soccer. But I said I'd do it, so I did. Um, that is one of the most, people think it's being a woman sports reporter at that time was tough, but walking out on a football field, like a varsity football field, I did high school ball for 40 years, pretty much, and baseball and football. And I didn't belong in either of those places, just like I didn't belong on a sports set back then. So, yeah, it was very difficult. Many of the men didn't want me there. I was not treated fairly most of the time. And it's funny, for years I was a wing, which meant I was on the line of scrimmage on the sidelines. And every year, and I've worked football in several states, but mostly in Arizona. And every year I would get thrown off crews because men would say, we're never going to get the state championship with you because you're a woman. And they were right. They were right. So we have a big mass meeting every year with 400 football officials from all around the state. And they said, anybody who wants to start a new crew, stand up. And I stood up. I went, okay, I'm going to be a referee and crew chief. I'm going to be in charge of the crew. And they know exactly what they're getting. Are we ever getting the state championship? No. Okay. But I'm a good official and I can do this. I stood up and a couple guys came up and said, hey, maybe we'll work with you. Interestingly, mostly military men who'd had women as commanding officers who were like, man, we're fine. It's all right. We can take orders from you.
Interesting.
And I ended up being a referee and crew chief for 24 years.
Wow.
I was also a teacher for 20 years. I don't miss that, but I miss Friday night football. I really do. I so enjoyed putting on my uniform and walking out there, and I'd work, we make mistakes like anybody else. It's a miserable job, by the way. Everybody hates you half the time. I've had police escorts to my car. I've had my tire knifed. I've had people yell and scream at me and threaten me. And but you walk off the field, you did the best you could. We're never perfect. We make mistakes just like everybody else. But there was a sense of satisfaction in it. And it's funny, I'd work whole games. And as I walked off the field, someone would go, hey, the ref's a woman. And I'd go, yeah. And then the ego in me would go, crap. They couldn't even tell I was a woman. But yes, I miss that desperately. And without that background, I couldn't have been a sportscaster because that made me understand the games. So if they're sending me out to interview a football player, or I'm going out to cover, I've covered kind of every sport on the planet at this point, it gave me a foundation. It also gave me credibility because when I got that first job in Columbus, Georgia, that's why they hired me, because they figured I knew what I was talking about.
Yes.
So, and I ended up working for 5 TV stations. I spent some time at ESPN anchoring SportsCenter.
Well, it's so smart that you say that because you talk about how women just weren't hired in these type of roles. But instead of you saying, okay, well, I have to switch what I want or what my passion is, you just, instead of not being able to go through one door, you created a new door or you built a new door.
But it took a long time. I was 28 before I got my first job in TV. And I remember my parents were so upset that my mother mostly, that I wanted to be a sportscaster. She thought I was being an idiot. And one day my parents drove to Washington, took me to lunch, and had an intervention.
Really?
They were like, we'll send you back to school because you're embarrassing us in front of our friends. I'm like, what are you talking about? They said, well, what are we supposed to say you're doing? I said, I'm a referee and an umpire, and I'm going to be a sportscaster. And my mother said, you're being ridiculous. You're nothing but a waitress. And I went, they said, we'll send you back to school to be a teacher. I said, I don't want to be a teacher. Ironically, I later became a teacher. But at that point, I didn't. And they absolutely, in their defense, there weren't women sportscasters. There just weren't. There were a handful of women sports writers who were starting to make a little noise, but there simply weren't women on TV. My mother made it almost to 99. When she was about 95, she saw women sportscasters and went, oh, look, there are women sportscasters. And I'm like, yes, Mom. Yes, there are.
Your parents being unsupportive, did that make you possibly rethink what you were going to do, or did that just light a bigger fire in you?
Oh, I'm big in the world of thinking no is a gift. You tell me I can't do something, I'm very stubborn. I'm Irish. I'm very stubborn. And for example, I'm dyslexic, which I didn't know until I was in my 50s. So I was not a really good student in high school. I didn't like to read. I came from a family of readers. In fact, my mother was a reporter in the 1940s. A
Really?
radio reporter. Yeah, which you'd think she'd want to meet. If I'd said I wanted to be Jane Pauley, she would have been excited. But the
Yeah.
sports thing, she didn't get at all.
Yeah.
And I remember, because I wasn't a good student, the only thing that saved me was music and theater and those kind of things. It saved my grade point average a little. And I remember my brother came up to me. He was in college 2 years ahead of me. And he's leaning in the doorway as I'm packing for college. And he goes, "You'll flunk out by Christmas. You're too stupid to be in college. I bet you $20 you can't even make it to Christmas." Well, I did. And, call me a jerk, but I have more degrees than he does. I'm going to go,
Yeah.
I win. But yeah, people, when they told me, I can't be a referee or I can't be an umpire, I just kept showing up.
Yeah.
When I went for my first umpire classes, I'm the only woman, and the guy who taught the class was horrible. He was a old DC police officer, and he would say horrible things about, sexual things, and then they'd all look at me to see if I flinched, and every kind of swear word in the world. And I wanted to say, hey, man, I lived in a girls' dorm for like 3.5 years, 4 years. And there's nothing you can say that's going to be weird.
Right.
Go ahead. Try to offend me. And because I didn't quit, that the man, Jim Beardsley, who was the police officer, who was the head of the umpire class, he took me under his wing. And he helped me. So there have been a couple of officials over the years that said, okay, all right, you didn't quit. Because let me tell you something. If you can't take the abuse in a class, how are you going to take it on the field? In 1981, I went to umpire school, me and 105 guys in Florida, St. Petersburg, Florida. And, they tortured us. They set you up. They screamed and yelled right in your nose like you're in the military. And the attitude is, if you can't take it here, how are you going to survive out there in the field? So, you can scream all you want at me, and I'm not even going to raise an eyebrow.
Yeah.
I don't get upset. I don't, because I learned how to control myself.
Right.
You have to as an official. I can't get angry with anybody. I can lose my job if I swear at a coach. But, I just have to go write a longer report after the game if they swear at me and I throw them out.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, it was very interesting. And being in TV in a time where people didn't accept me, the two careers, or officiating was an avocation, they were similar in that I didn't belong in any of those places. And I just kept saying, you don't want me? Tough, I'm not leaving.
Yeah.
But was it easy? No. Did I sometimes cry in my car on the way home? Yeah, I admit I did.
So how did that first job in TV news happen?
Back in the olden days, before the internet, before LinkedIn, there was a magazine called Broadcasting Magazine. And in the back of it were want ads, like little boxes that said, photographer wanted, send your resume to box 3794. Okay, so one day there was one that said sportscaster wanted. They do not tell you where this is in the world. They just say sportscaster wanted. Send your tape or your resume, whatever, to this number. And I did. I sent it. And didn't think much of it because I'd applied to ones before and never got anything back. And I got a phone call one day. I'm living in Washington, D.C. I'm engaged to a football player at the time who played for the Redskins, the then Redskins. And I got a call that said, we'd like you to come down and be our sports director in Columbus, Georgia. I grew up outside of New York City, Washington, D.C., center of the universe. Columbus, Georgia was like I got sent 20 years backwards. It was very odd for me. And to be a woman sportscaster there was exceedingly bizarre. They hired me because they were the worst station in town and they wanted people to watch. And I got there on a Sunday night and they said, you're on the air on Wednesday. Well, here was the big problem with my plan. I could call a football game and a baseball game and a hockey game and I could make a great cocktail, but I didn't know how to be on TV. I'd never been on live TV in my life.
Yeah.
And no one told me what to do. So the first night I'm on, I didn't understand how a teleprompter worked. And back then, going ancient times again, we used something called carbon paper. Are you too young to know what carbon paper is?
Too young to know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. When we typed our scripts, it made 6 copies at a time. There was paper in between, and that would print on all 6. So when you were done, you turned your scripts into the newsroom assistant, manager, whoever she was, and she would separate the 6 copies so that everybody involved in the show had copies of every script. I didn't know that. And I also didn't know that the script had a line down the middle. And on the left side, you were supposed to put directions to the director, like, and on camera.
Right.
And bring up the score, bring up the soundbite. Here's the video to do play-by-play. I didn't know that. I just wrote everything that I wanted to say from one side of that paper to the other, and no one corrected me. So I'm on the set for the first time, shaking, panicky. And they introduced me, and I turned his teleprompter, and all of my sentences were cut in half. So I couldn't read them, nor did I have any copies in my hand, because I didn't know that that's why people had physical. You see old news broadcasts; they all have physical copies. Today,
Yeah.
you have an iPad or something. And
I don't know. Personally, I still love having that piece of paper.
oh God, I never went on a set without it again. But that was 3.5 minutes of my life that I don't remember now. That it was like being in an accident, car accident.
Blacked out.
The worst part was, though, I thought they were going to fire me. They didn't. And I was very fortunate in my first 2 stations that there were men there that I got hired as the sports director over them, which shouldn't have happened. And they were very kind. And he started to teach me. And I didn't know. It was my first night. I had no idea.
Right.
The worst part was one of my mother's friends was in Atlanta at the time, in a hotel, turned on the TV. There I was. And she called my mother and told her I was awful. And it would be years before my mother would watch me on TV. Yes, it was big about embarrassing the family, that kind of thing. But I will say this, and I taught journalism, and I taught briefly in college where I taught sportscasting, sports reporting. I said, look, it's really good if you go 1,000 miles away from anyone you know.
Yeah.
Because that way you can learn in front of strangers and not in front of people that go, oh my God, you're awful, because it's a learning curve. Officiating was the exact same way. You have to go out there and learn in front of people.
Exactly.
So, yeah. And then I actually went home to marry the football player and realized I was out of my mind. And then got a job in Rochester, New York for about 2.5 years. Then I moved to Phoenix for a couple of years. Then I moved to ESPN for a couple of years. And then I was pushing 40. And nobody wanted me on TV anymore. I did work for the Phoenix Suns for 2 seasons. That was part-time. It was just during the NBA season. I was their studio host. But now I'm almost 40 years old, and I can't get a job. I had a good agent, couldn't get a job anywhere because the target audience in sports is 18 to 34-year-old males. And once they say, back then, everybody argues like, oh, it's not like that now. I'm like, well, it was then.
Right.
So I couldn't get a job anywhere in the country. And I was going through a bad marriage. My husband was an alcoholic. It was a mess. And he was upset that when my contract wasn't renewed at ESPN, that I wasn't making all the money anymore. So it was a mess. And I was depressed. And a friend of mine said, come back to Phoenix. And I'm like, And she said, just get in the car. I said, I have 2 big dogs and 4 cats. And you live in a new condo. She goes, just put them in the car. And I drove across country by myself in my Geo Prism with 2 big dogs and 4 cats, and got there. And I was in debt. I had no money. And she took, for 6 months, I lived at her home. And my old boss at Channel 10 in Phoenix said, I'm going to have a job for you. Just hold on. Give me 2 months. I said, great. And then one day I opened the newspaper and he'd been fired. And I couldn't get work. And so I went to a sports bar even and said, look, I make a great cocktail and I can talk to all your patrons about sports, whether they're sober or not. I can entertain them. And that man looked me up and down, and said, I don't think so. And I realized he wanted a 20-something in a short skirt and push-up bra, and I was almost 40 and I couldn't get work. And
Wow.
so I went back to officiating kids sports. Now I never really quit, but it's the only way I could make money. So
Yeah.
5 days a week I officiated football or baseball in Arizona, and they play those all year round.
Yeah.
And I hid. I hid behind my uniform because I didn't want anyone to see me that I knew. I didn't want anybody from TV to go, "So what are you doing now?" And then one day I was in the grocery store after a baseball game, all sweaty and my hair is a mess, and I'm wearing my gray slacks and my baseball shoes. And this man is staring at me in the frozen food aisle. And he looks at me and he goes, "Didn't you used to be somebody?" And I just walked away. And I was like, it was bad. I mean, 4 years I didn't have a job except officiating.
Well, and so much of our career in this industry is tied to our identity for so long. And when you don't have that anymore, it can feel like grief.
It was grief. I understand that now. And I wish I hadn't spent so much time feeling sorry for me because I did. I mean, I was hiding from people because, and I could do that on a football field. I could do that on a baseball diamond. And it's the only way I made money. And then I saw it in the paper one day. It said sports writer wanted. And it was at a small local newspaper in Arizona. And I went running over and I said, I'd like to apply for your sports writer job. And I handed him my resume. I'd worked for, I don't know, 5 TV stations. And he said, "I don't think so." I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "I'd like to write sports." He said, "You don't know anything about writing sports." I said, "I wrote thousands of stories over 10 years for television. Give me a chance." And they did give me a chance. And it was a $7 an hour job, and I begged. I begged. And it's funny because after a while, all my stories started ending up on the front page. And so, going from TV writing to newspaper magazines, I worked for 3 newspapers, 3 magazines later on. It's just longer. You have more space to tell a story. And then
Yeah.
I ended up writing novels. So, I mean, I like to tell stories. So that was an interesting side thing. But yeah, it was hard. It was real. And that was I said that was not a full-time job. So friends kept saying, "You need to go back to school and be a teacher." I'm like, "I don't want to be a teacher." I kept thinking I was going to be a sports reporter still, right? And
Right.
and when I was 42, I went back to college, got my degree, got hired in a Title I school, which I don't know if you know is where 75% of the kids live in poverty. I was a middle-class kid. Both my parents were college graduates. I had never seen poverty. And I went in there and they hired me to teach journalism and communication skills, that kind of thing. And I'm teaching a video program. And I'm a hard ass. You know what it's like in a newsroom.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody's crazy. You got to do your job. There's a serious deadline. If you
Yeah.
don't make it, I would tell the kids, when the red light went on, if I wasn't in my seat, I'm fired. So I was real hard on those kids. You got to be punctual. You got to do your work on time. You got to make your deadlines. And one day, a little girl stood up in the middle of my class because I was haranguing them. They had not done their show very well. And she said, "We don't like you at all." And I went, I didn't say anything. I'm looking at her. And she said, "And we don't need you." And every kid in my class left. Every kid. And I stood in front of that empty classroom and I cried because I couldn't understand what was wrong. I was trying to teach them to be ready for the world, right? So another teacher came up to me and she goes, "Well, have you ever considered being nicer?" I go, "What do you mean nice?" I said, "There's no nice in a newsroom. There's no nice on a football field." And she said, "Well, these are kids. You have to be nicer." And I didn't listen. And then one day I dragged a kid outside because he was late every single day. And I'm haranguing this kid. He's 14 years old, looking at his shoes. And he said, "I'm so sorry, Miss Montgomery, but I slept on my uncle's couch last night. And I don't know the bus system from there. And I don't know where I'm going to sleep every night. And I try to get to school on time, but I don't know how." And I went, "Oh my God, I am haranguing a homeless child." From that day forward, I became nicer. I got to know each of my students to find out, because let's face it, is a kid going to do their homework if they're hungry? Or they haven't had a
Right.
shower for a week, or they're
Right.
being neglected or abused, or they've got gangs, they got girls pregnant at 14. It was endless. And so I made it a point from that time on to get to know my students, to figure out if there's any way I could help them. Like, we had a lot of hungry kids. We fed them morning, breakfast and lunch, and on the weekends we could send we had a pantry. We could send boxes of food home. We had a room where they could get shoes and clothing and backpacks and notebooks and things. No questions asked. Take them.
Yeah.
Take whatever you need. Because if they're cold or they don't have any toiletries at home or soap or hair shampoo or anything, it's hard for them to care about school.
Yeah.
So I will say this: I would not do anything differently. I am grateful they threw me on a TV. I wish it hadn't taken me quite so long to snap out of my depression, but I spent 20 years teaching in that school.
Yeah. Is it true that later you became a foster mom?
Yes. Yeah. And that's interesting in a way. I could not have children of my own. And for anybody who's ever struggled with that, it can be very disheartening.
Yeah.
But I got over it. You grow out of it. At least I did. And I often had my students repeatedly, like I had a journalism class, I taught newspaper. So kids would come, the kids that liked me, half loved me, half hated me. I was never in the middle. They could take my class over and over. So I got to know my kids really well. But I worried about them in the summer because that's 10 weeks of unstructured life. And when you have kids who don't have structure, they can get in trouble. And even though I was told never, ever to do this, I wrote my name on the board, my phone number on the board. I said, if you get in trouble and you don't know what to do, call me and I will help you if I can. That's all I said. Some of them ignored me. Some kids wrote my number down. And one summer, I'm 55 years old, and I get a call from a kid who I barely knew. I had him one semester, and he just wanted to chat. I'm like, Brandon, is everything all right? He goes, oh, yeah, everything's fine. But he called me over the summer, and I said, look, I put you in the newspaper class, so I'll see you when school starts. He said, okay. School started. He didn't show up. Several weeks went by, and he disappeared. His phone number had been disconnected, and I worried about him. And then one day he called, and he said, Miss Montgomery, I'm hungry. I said, what do you mean you're hungry? He said, well, I'm in foster care now. And they lock up all the food in the morning, and the new school doesn't have my paperwork, so they won't feed me lunch. I said, can I call you back at this number? He said, yes. I said, I'll get right back to you. I hung up, and I'm swearing. Luckily, there were no students in my classroom. I am swearing up a storm. And the teacher who told me to be nicer said, what is the matter? I explained the situation. She said, oh, well, if that bothers you so much, why don't you call the foster care people and say he can live with you? I said, don't be ridiculous. I'm 55 years old. I've never been a mother. She said, then quit complaining. 2 weeks later, that child was dropped at my door. And since that time, I've had two are my legal foster kids. 2 call me mom, 3 kind of call me mom. So there are 5 of them at this point. They're all grown up. They're all in their 25 to 30. I'm still mom. My partner, he was I forgot to tell him I was bringing a child home, by the way. And he said, look, if you ever do this again, just warn me. Warn me first. So he's dad, and I'm a grandmother. I have an 8-year-old grandson from my oldest son, Brandon. And it has been quite a ride that I never expected would happen. So if I hadn't been thrown on a TV and I hadn't become a teacher, I wouldn't be a mom.
Yeah. And that was part of your journey and part of your purpose.
That's why I tell people, I said, you can plan all you want, but life doesn't always go the way you plan. And there's going to be twists and turns, and some days are going to suck and some days are going to be great, but it's all part of it. And you can't be afraid of change. And I know we are. I mean, I'm thinking, this kid is on my doorstep. I'm like, holy crap, how am I going to be a mother? Okay. All of my kids were my students at some point. And I wouldn't change anything. I would have been nicer sooner. I think I would have done that.
When you make plans, God laughs, as they say.
Yeah.
Do you remember your first day at ESPN?
Part of it was that the day I got there, they had just brought computers into the newsroom. And everybody had been through 2 weeks of training. I missed the training. They put a computer on my desk and said, you have a week to figure it out, then you'll be on the air. I had no idea what a computer, we used typewriters, old typewriters, and no one taught me. They handed me a book. Now, I'm dyslexic, so I learned that because I became a reading teacher for a while. And I had no idea. I kept erasing all my scripts. That was what I remember from the beginning. There was subtle sabotage. For example, there was a man named Howie, and this was before you could just go online and get the answer to any question you had in the planet. And I didn't even know what this man did. He just wandered around the newsroom all the time. Well, it turns out he was the information man. He could tell you the last time the Jets won by 3 points in the snow at home. He could do that. Now, did he have a big library full of stuff? Yeah, sure he did. But he could get you all those answers. So I never asked Howie anything. And one night I'm in a hurry. I got to get on the set. I needed a piece of information. He gave it to me. I went on the air. I get called into my boss's office the next day. He goes, "Why did you say that on the air?" I said, "What do you mean?" And he said that the piece of information, which I don't remember what it was now. And I didn't want to throw Howie under the bus. I thought maybe he made a mistake. And my boss is yelling at me. And I said, "Look." And I turn around and Howie's leaning in the doorway, smiling. And I went, "Look, Howie gave me that information last night before I went on the air." And Howie looked at my boss and said, "I never told her anything." That kind of thing. And so I'm the only one in the station that can't use the information man.
What are some standout moments you remember covering sports during your career?
When I was in Georgia, my boss said, "You have to go. The wrestlers are in town." And I went, "Oh, Olympic wrestlers are practicing?" They go, No, wrestlers." I said, "What do you, oh, you mean like WWF wrestlers?" I said, "We cover them." They said, "Of course, they're in town." I said, "That's not a sport." They said, "Go down to the Coliseum. You're going to interview a wrestler." So I go down there. I know nothing about professional wrestling, except that it's performance art, right? And I get down there and I'm waiting in this hallway with my partner down there. And he's setting up the camera. And here comes this monstrous man. He's all wet like he's been in the shower. And he comes down to us. And I said, "Look, to be honest, sir, I don't know anything about wrestling. And I know it's not really a sport. So I don't know what to ask you." And he's silent. And then he looks at me. He goes, "What do you mean it's not real?" I said, "Well, it's not a real sport." And he pulls his shirt and he goes, "Do these scars look real to you, honey? Do they look real?" And then he pulled up his shirt and he's got scars. And he grabbing his knee, he goes, "Look at my leg. Do those scars look real?" And I said, I thought he was going to kill me. I was like, "I am so sorry." I don't know who that man was. And if I could find him, I'd apologize. Because, of course, these men are athletes. But to me, a sport, you don't know the outcome before it occurs. So,
Right.
yeah, that was not a great moment. You're probably too young to remember Jack LaLanne. Did you know who he was?
Mm-mm.
He was the first man who went on TV to teach people to exercise. He was a little guy at a TV show. Everybody knew Jack LaLanne, and he was 80 years old, and he was going to swim to Alcatraz. He was 80, and I interviewed him. He was one of the I don't know why he sticks in my head. And then I had people who kind of rescued me a few times. I had to go in locker rooms. They're stinky and uncomfortable, and I didn't want to be there, but I had no choice because you're on a deadline and you have to get your interviews. Now, today they're women photographers, but I was always the only woman in the locker room, which I learned it's uncomfortable for everybody. Nobody wants to go in there. But because the
Right.
players all sneak out the back door, we don't have a choice. So one night, the Lakers were playing the Suns, and we were waiting outside the Lakers locker room. And I was always nervous because the men I always felt like, they were shunning me a little bit. I didn't belong. And I was nervous. I didn't want to go in the locker room, but I did. And there's music playing inside the locker room. The door bursts open. Here comes Magic Johnson. And he smiles at me. I'm guessing you've seen the Magic Johnson smile. He's lights up a room. And he grabbed me and started dancing with me in front of all the other sports reporters. And at first I was appalled. I was like embarrassed. And then all the guys started laughing, but not in a bad way. it was like they were as uncomfortable as I was going into the locker room. And he broke that tension. And
Oh,
he spun me around and waved and left. And I was like, thank you, Magic. Thank you for that.
oh, I
Because,
love that.
yeah, yeah. And the other one I remember, I don't know if you remember Manute Bol. He was the tallest man to ever play in the NBA.
Mm,
He was from Sudan. He was
yes.
7'7". And I was going to do an interview for him. We were at the NBA playoffs on the road, San Francisco, I think. It was Golden. He played for Golden State. And so we get there, and remember I said sometimes some people weren't nice to me and they would sabotage me. Well, the night before, all of us reporters traveled on the same planes. You know, we all hung out together, so we were all technically friendly. And the night before, we were all having drinks, and I said, "Oh, by the way, what time's the press conference in the morning?" And this guy said 10 o'clock. I said, "Great." And so my cameraman and I showed up at 9:30. There's no one there but that guy. He's sitting on the bleachers, going on a chair. Goes, "Oh, are we a little late this morning, Ann? Are we late?" Because the press conference happened at 9, and so I now don't have an interview. And he laughed and walked away. I thought my cameraman was going to hit him, and I'm going, "What do we do?" Because now there's a hole in the news. I mean, I'm supposed to do a minute, and back then we did longer pieces, minute and a half for the 5 o'clock news that I wasn't going to have. And there was a woman was the media person for Golden State. And she came out and she said, "Look, the guys are done for the day. They don't have to talk to you." And I said, she goes, "But I'll tell Manute that you're here, but don't count on it." I waited and waited and went, what am I going to do to fill you know what it's like if you don't have something to
Yes.
fill those slots
Oh,
with.
yeah.
And try to figure out how to explain it to my boss. And then here comes Manute Bol. And he's 7'7". I mean, I could stand. I'm 5'7", and even holding up my mic, it was like at his chest. He was charming and kind, and didn't have to do that. He saved my butt when one of my peers tried to sink me. So
Incredible.
I've always remembered him for that. He's deceased now, sadly, and that man made all his NBA money and went back to Sudan to feed people. I mean,
Wow.
just. In fact, his son now plays in the NBA.
Oh, yeah.
But anyway, I remember things like that, not that aren't necessarily, you know, they're just moments in my brain. You know, when you do it every day, not everything sticks in your head.
Right, exactly. Are there any skills that you think sportscasters, aspiring sportscasters, and those that want to make it to the network level, what skills they should have?
You have to know how to write a story. Writing is the most essential thing. It doesn't even matter what you look like so much anymore. Maybe with girls it does. But and look at the guys. Nobody cares what they look like. But you have to know how to tell a story. And this is the biggest problem. I taught at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism. And my students were like, "Well, we don't have to know how to write." I said, "What are you talking about? This is called sports reporting. It's about writing a story that's interesting." So writing is huge. You know, even today, you don't have to have the voice. I mean, I was fortunate;
Yeah.
I have a good voice, and women all had to be good looking. But really, can you tell a story? And that's, how many people know how to write now with AI producing everything kids are turning in? I mean, it's horrible.
Yeah.
So I don't know. You have to be able to uh, assemble the pieces of a story. You go out, you do the interviews, you do the research, you figure out how to cut those interviews into little pieces that you can tell the story through the people you're interviewing. You
Yep.
have to write. So I'm saying, if you don't know how to tell a story and you don't know how to write a story, I can't see how you can be a reporter.
Well, and especially when it comes to sports, anyone could say who won, who lost, but how
Right.
are you going to make that story unique?
Well, and that's true. And it's funny, way back when I was doing this, I remember I was asked the Arizona Cardinals. I was their beat reporter for 2 years, which was shocking to everybody. So I traveled on their plane. I don't know why my boss gave me that gig, but it was great. And they had a first round draft pick, and they sent me to California to interview the kid. Really, really nice kid. Now I can't think of his name right offhand, but he was an artist and he liked cats. And he's got this massive bicep. Who's real big and strong. And he had a kitten. that in the crook of his arm. And I told my photographer, get that with him with the cat. And then he was sitting under a tree, he was drawing. And I went, okay, my story in my mind was to tell people who this young man was. I got ripped in the local paper. No one cares that he likes cats. I'm like, you didn't understand. Today we all want to know who these guys are. But back then it was
Yes.
X's and O's and numbers, and that's it. And
Interesting.
I tried to inject regular regular people things into my stories. Today it's very common. Back then it wasn't. They thought I was a weird girl doing it.
Well, what do you think separates a good sportscaster from a great one?
Knowledge. And it doesn't mean you have to know everything in the world, but you have to understand the games, and you have to have a lot of knowledge. Like these people that do play-by-play in color, they have people handing them notes and stuff all the time, but they are on top of that every day. They have to know who's hurt, who's on a roll, who's falling down, why the coaches are getting fired. They have to know a lot of things. So you really have to have that knowledge. Now, many sports casters like that do play-by-play in color, they do two sports. They don't do every sport. If you're talking about someone who does the sports on the local news, you have to understand your community. And we move. I mean, I moved from Washington, D.C. to Georgia to Rochester, New York to Phoenix to Connecticut back to Phoenix. So you have to immerse yourself in that local community when you get there, because they don't give you very much leeway. I know there's a gentleman named Jerry Colangelo who was the original owner of the Phoenix Suns, and he's a big deal. He's in the NBA Hall of Fame. And I got there and I didn't know who he was, but he was a big deal in Phoenix. And his name is Colangelo. I grew up with Italian friends in New Jersey, and I was embarrassed to ask anybody how to say this guy's name. So I called my friend and I said, how would you say this guy's name? She said, Colangelo. So I went on the air and called him Jerry Colangelo. And there are still people that come up to me and say, oh, you called him Jerry Colangelo. This was 1988 and 9. And they still tease me about it. I'm like, well, in New York, they would have called him Colangelo. But out there, Colangelo. So you have to know your market, or you put your foot in your mouth. And I did that many times, moving from place to place. So know your market. If you're in sports, you need to understand the games. Because you're going to have to cover all different. I've covered curling. I've covered every kind of sport there is. And I didn't understand them all. Today, you can just go online and go, what is curling? It's an Olympic sport, right? But yeah, you have to do your research, and you have to be someone who can look other people in the eye and converse with them. Ask questions. Let's face it, how many people actually look you in the eye now and have a chat? Not many. I have kids in their 20s. They're like, people shouldn't call you unless they text first and ask for permission. I'm like, no. Let's look people in the eye and actually talk to them and get to know them. And I think that's huge. You have to put people at ease. You're not always doing interviews where things are happy. And so you put people at ease. But the idea that you can take the puzzle pieces of that story, your interview, your research, the people, your sources and everything, and create something from it. I loved that.
Yeah.
It's like writing a good chapter in a book.
Yeah.
I made that. Yay. So that they don't seem to get that. They think that everybody that's a sportscaster is just making it up as they go along. I'm like, no.
Okay, let's do quick fires. Fill in the blank. If I weren't a sportscaster, I would be
An archaeologist.
Really?
Yeah, I would. I've written a couple of historical fictions. One is about ancient times, and I love history. I got to study history in Europe. My junior year. I went abroad to Luxembourg, and so I've studied a great deal of history. And ancient history fascinates me. Prehistory, before we wrote things down. So yeah, I'd be an archaeologist.
Your coffee order.
I am a tea drinker.
Okay.
I want my tea black with nothing in it, unless it's very cold and I want to put some Grand Marnier in there, and I might do that sometime. But mostly I make a big pot of black tea every day, not Earl Grey. That tastes like perfume. And you wouldn't believe how hard it is to get a cup of tea. I go out and I say, I'd like some tea. And they say, oh, we have chamomile and peppermint. I'm like, no, no, no. Those are herb drinks. I want the tea from the tea bush. I want the
Yeah.
black tea, not the green tea, not the black tea. Hot black tea is my thing.
Love it. Your favorite travel destination? I mean, you're living in a travel destination.
Yeah, and I've traveled extensively. I've been a very spoiled girl. Um, my favorite one, that's really hard. I lived in Luxembourg, which means you were like half an hour from France and half an hour from Belgium and 20 minutes from Germany. So I've traveled all over. I don't know that I have a favorite one.
Mm.
I depends on what kind of mood I'm in. I loved Australia. I'm a mineral collector. You can probably see some behind me there.
Oh, yeah.
I've spent my life collecting rocks, and I went to the Australian Mineral Symposium and went mining with these crazy old miners. It was great fun. That's one of my most favorite trips, and that's where I started scuba diving again.
Your favorite restaurant?
Ah, Port Douglas, Australia. Um, I don't even know how to. When you get there, it's a dirt trail. And it just says, there's a sign that says Nautilus. And you walk into the rainforest up a hill on a dirt trail. And then at the top of the trail is a woman at a podium dressed in like black and whites, for servers. And this was a surprise to me. My partner planned it. I had no idea we were doing this. There's the roof of the restaurant is the rainforest. There's no roof. The rainforest is lit up. And the tables are spread through the forest. So you might only have two tables over here and four tables over there. And the waiters are in black and whites. It's very formal. And you're in the forest. And it was one of the most fantastic meals I've ever had. And I was married to a chef, so I'm can be snotty about my food. But
It
it
sounds
was
amazing.
spectacular. And that was the first day I'd been scuba diving again since I was 16 years old. And it had been like 35 years or something. So not only did we dive that day, but he took me to this, it's called the Nautilus.
And it's in Australia?
It's in Port Douglas, Australia. And it was so stunning. I can still see the canopy of the rainforest that was lit up, gently. And you're literally on a like a little platform out in the forest.
Wow.
And they had tables all far away from each other, like you're pretty much there by yourself. And we had alligator and all kinds of crazy things. But
That's
that is
cool.
my favorite restaurant.
Something people often get wrong about you.
That sports are the only thing I'm interested in. I loved sports, but they're really no longer my world too much. I mean, I watch football on TV, but that's about it. I had to retire from officiating, which broke my heart more than anything. But I have had surgeries and been broken and run over and broke my back. It beats you up just like it does any other athlete. So I couldn't get out of the way anymore, so I had to retire.
Yeah.
And yeah, they just assume, like I have 6 traditionally published novels that not one of them's about sports. I don't write about sports. So I write a blog every week, and sometimes I write about sports, but they always think that that's the only thing I've been interested in. I'm like, no, it's not.
The last movie, TV show, or book you watched and loved?
Wow. I love movies. For a brief time, I was a movie reviewer for a newspaper. I couldn't
Cool.
believe it. They were in the newsroom and they go, anybody want to go cover a movie? I'm like, pick me. You mean you're going to pay me to go sit in a movie theater? Because back then, you went to a regular movie theater and there'd be like 3
Yep.
reporters. And you're going to pay me for my opinion of a movie? I had so much fun with that. So I love film. And this time of year, I watch all the Academy Award nominees, and they make fun of me. The kids make fun of me because I make my partner Ryan make me a fabulous meal. I put on a tiara, and I have a T-shirt, but I have long pearl and diamond earrings, and I wait for them to call me for best adapted screenplay, which is turning one of my books into a film.
I love it.
So yeah, we just watched Begonia, which is bizarre.
Yes,
I
I
can't say
heard.
I loved it. So we've seen like 5 of the ones that are up for Academy Awards. We just watched Landman, which is interesting. It's not my favorite by Taylor Sheridan. I'm still a Yellowstone fan.
Yeah.
As far as books, I'm pretty critical about books. The last book I loved was Christian Hanna's The Women, which is
Oh,
about
I've heard good
the
things.
nurses in Vietnam. Oh my gosh, that was a fantastic book.
If you could switch lives with one person for a day, who would it be?
No one, no one. I know you think I'm crazy, maybe, but I have been so fortunate. Like I tell my kids, if I got hit by a meteor tomorrow, which as a rock person would be my way to die, just hit me with a meteor right on my head, just vaporize me. I've had a great time. I've It's not always been great all the time. You know, there have been ups and downs, but if you're happy all the time, how do you I mean if you're happy all the time, I don't think you know you're happy. I used to ask my students that, who would like to be happy 24 hours a day your entire life? They all raise their hands. But if you haven't gone through bad things, I don't think you appreciate happy.
Appreciate. Yeah.
So I told my kids, I said, if I died tomorrow, please have a party. I've had a great time. I've had ups and downs, but I would change almost nothing. I would have been nicer sooner. But other than that, so I wouldn't want to be anybody else, really.
One thing you're deeply grateful for right now.
My sense of curiosity. I am constantly, it's funny. I didn't get a cell phone until I was 65. I hate them. Okay. I was a teacher and they destroyed my classroom, as every teacher will tell you. As a teacher, I cannot compete when a 15-year-old boy is looking at porn under his desk. Okay. I can't compete. So I hated cell phones, didn't get one until I retired from teaching in 2020. I am intensely curious about lots of things. As I said, I've been very fortunate to travel extensively. I'm a mineral collector, so I spent a lot of times in wilderness. I'm a scuba diver, which is sort of another wildernessy place. Wildernessy, I made that up. And I'm curious about history. I'm curious about nature. I was maybe born that way. I don't know. And I am grateful for it because over the course of our lives, we will not be able to do the things we love forever. It's like if you look at a football player, like I had students who would say, I'm going to be an NFL player. I said, okay, honey, well, after that, because that's like a 3.5-year career, you're going to be 26. What do you want to do then? Because your life is going to change dramatically. That's why athletes fall apart, because they don't think beyond that. Or the piano player, that's all they ever did, that's all they ever wanted, and then they lose their hands. I know that's dramatic, but life changes, and you
Yes.
have to continually find things you're interested in. And for me, I moved into writing novels, that became the next thing I was interested in. And I'm grateful that I have pretty much endless curiosity about things. That's what I love about the phone. I can go, I can look that up, right?
Yeah.
That's magical to me.
Yeah.
I barely answer the phone, but I do look things up all the time. So, yeah, I'm grateful for my sense of curiosity. Don't know where it came from, but
Well, and it's one of the biggest assets as a journalist is to be curious.
yeah, I'm always asking questions.
Yeah.
And archaeology is one of those things that just fascinates me all the time. So I know people. I have a sister who's not interested in a single thing on the planet, and I feel badly for people like that. If you
Yeah.
don't have that spark to go, ooh, what's that? I want to see that. I want to do that. Let's go out to watch the turtles come in and breed, or just
Yeah.
things. And so I'm very grateful for curiosity.
Final question. If you could go back in time to when you first started your career, what piece of advice would you give yourself?
I would say it'll be okay. It'll be okay. I had to learn to not take things personally, especially as an official, but, certainly in the newsroom too. But you know how you have a bad night on the air or something, you think it's like today doom scrolling almost. It's like, oh my God, my career's.
Yes.
Just take a breath. It'll be fine. Don't take every single thing so dramatically or so seriously, because I used to do that. And you're in television, I think you understand this, is that people are watching you and you go, oh my God, I looked funny in this moment. I mean, you go through your shows, don't you?
Yep.
And you look at what you did.
Yep.
I got to a point where I had to stop. Oh my God, I made a funny face there. Or that didn't look right. Just relax. Just don't take everything so seriously.
I try to say, will I actually remember this a year from now?
No, you probably
The answer is
won't.
no.
It's funny the things you do remember, because
Yeah.
most of it's a blur. It really is the day-to-day stuff that you did. There's just not a whole lot of stuff that stands out. And the ones that do, you're like, why do I remember that? Like Jack LaLanne, the man I interviewed. I don't know why. But
Yeah.
yeah, I would just say, take a breath. It did take me an exceptionally long time to have my career. And there is that I'm in my 30s and all my friends are having kids and I'm not married. But yeah, the bottom line is you have to keep moving and don't have kids. Now, today, you can all get pregnant and still be on TV. Not in my time.
Yeah.
Not in my time. That
Yeah.
was not something they didn't want to see baby bumps on TV. So, yeah, it's different now. But again, just try to calm down and not get overly agitated by everyday stuff.
Well, Anne, this has been incredible. I feel like I could talk to you for like in 2 more hours easily. But
You.
where could people find not only, follow you, but also where could they find your books so they can buy your books?
My website, AnnMontgomeryWriter.com. That's Ann with an E, AnnMontgomeryWriter.com. And all my social media's there. And you can buy the books anywhere pretty much.